Thank you all for coming. It's the last session of the last day. I don't know about you guys, my brain has kind of melted. Lots of good information. Has everybody had a good conference? Anybody win anything at any of the raffles? No? I saw one of those blue swords walk in here. No? Was I wrong? Maybe they left. Oh, I don't know. I don't have a carry-on big enough to fit that in, and I don't know what TSA is going to do with that. Yeah. Yep. All right. My name is Dan Mallott. We'll talk a little bit more about me in a minute here. First of all, the housekeeping bits, all those slides that you've seen at the beginning of every presentation. Please silence your cell phones. I was in a session yesterday where somebody's rang right when the slide went up. Yep. And if your cell phone does for some reason go off and it's not close at hand, we'll all get to enjoy whatever your ringtone is. PASS is more than just Summit. It's also more than just SQL Saturday. So there are a ton of ways to get involved, whether it's the online webinars, local user groups, as mentioned, SQL Saturday. It's also volunteering. PASS and the local user groups are always in need of more volunteers. Please help out if you can. So this is me. I am a principal for West Monroe Partners. We are a business and technology consulting firm based in Chicago, although we have offices lots of other places, including Seattle, LA, Dallas, San Francisco, and New York. If you're interested in learning more, please come see me. I used to be a DBA, then I got better. In fairness, that was somebody else that said that to me. So now I architect and develop high-performance solutions for primarily healthcare clients. And in addition, I like cold places, so I spend lots of time on ice rinks. Session evaluations. Please, please, please do these, not just for the prize. These do help speakers improve their talks and improve their content and understand what content is good, what content is bad, and what content needs to go a little bit deeper or is commonly known across the community and maybe doesn't need to be talked about as much. In fact, this talk has been affected by feedback. So 5 p.m. Friday, November 15th to win the prizes. I think it stays open after that. Real quick, before we dive in, this is meant to be a high-level talk. It's a survey of tactics and technology. We're not going to go particularly deep on any of them. If you want to chat about some things a little more deeply, afterwards is great. If you are looking for an in-depth treatment of any of these topics, this might not be the session for you. Yes, nobody's getting up to leave. All right. So what are we going to talk about? We'll do a quick intro. We're going to talk about how to design our database objects securely. We'll talk about role-based access. I'll do a quick rundown of the built-in features that I think are appropriate, how and when to use them. And then we'll finish up with some things you can do when you can't start fresh, which, how many people out here have databases in production? How many people out here can't start fresh with anything I talk about in this talk? Yeah. And then there should be some time for questions at the end. Although if there's something burning, please feel free to raise your hand in the middle of the talk, and we'll discuss it. All right, data breaches. So who all listened to Tara's keynote on yesterday? Yeah. So here are some statistics about the things that she was talking about. 95% of breached records, government, retail, and technology. This is the year 2016. 95% of breaches are due to human error. That means somebody like you or me screwed up. Whether that's we didn't apply a patch, we coded a SQL injection in, we didn't encrypt our data, we aren't using SSL, something like that. It's our fault. Average cost of a data breach is expected to exceed $150 million next year. Now, that's an average cost, so obviously there's upper and lower bounds. But I can tell you that for my firm, the fastest growing segment of our technology practice is incident response. And now some of our clients are starting to get smarter, incident prevention. Come in and scan our environment and find out where we might be weak. The other two, a hacker attack every 39 seconds, and you can see why there's an estimated 3.8 million records stolen every day. What was the number that Tara said yesterday? So, like her social security number was worth like 3 cents. Is it 3? Is that the number? Yeah, it's out there. We don't want to continue the cycle. So what kind of data do we need to secure? PII, obviously, right? So that's my name, my address, my spouse, my social security number. Protected health information in the United States, known as HIPAA data. Things about my personal medical history. Data governed by GDPR, which may be more data than you think it is. Payment data, credit card numbers, ACH information. How many of you do online payments? Yeah, that's a lot. How many of you use a third-party processor? Okay, so some of you have to store this information somehow. Data that might affect your company's stock or public standing. Yeah. Facebook doesn't look so good right now. And they didn't even have a data breach. Industry trade secrets, yeah. Maybe even salary data. Although in this world of Glassdoor, where people can self-report, that's a little bit less of a secret than it used to be. So how are we securing this data? Our database designs can help us out a lot here. We have basic data objects that will help us to produce a more secure design. So tables. We can split tables so that our non-sensitive and sensitive data are in separate tables, and then secure those objects differently. There are some drawbacks there. There are drawbacks to all of this. The question is, are the drawbacks worse than having data get out into the world? Schemas are very useful. And then we can use views as well, right? Does anybody run a system where the only data access is via a view? Okay, we got a couple out there. Yeah, for most of us, developers have direct table access, applications have direct table access. Views can help there, right? We only expose the columns that are needed. We can apply masking to them in the definition of the view. And in SQL Server, at least, we can even index the views, although there are some limitations that we'll talk a little bit about. So, how does this work? Splitting tables. All right, so full disclosure, this is the first time I've used notebooks has been this week. So if something goes wrong, we'll go back to just plain scripts. All right, so splitting tables. So in this, I'm going to create a table that has no sensitive data in it, right? So in my case, in this HR example, I've got a first name, a last name, and a hire date. And then my sensitive information is going to be my social security number, my salary, and my birth date, because I don't like people celebrating my birthday. And then the way we link these tables together, so we've got our foreign key that references the non-sensitive, and then a unique clustered index on that. All right. That's it in there. So let's go ahead and execute this guy. And command is completed successfully. Pretty simple, right? However, this does give us a problem in that all of our tables are still sitting in the same schema, and maybe we don't want to do that. So let's do schemas instead. So we separate out our data into a non-secure data and a secure data schema. And then we'll go ahead and insert in, and we can talk a little bit about how that's working. So, great, done. So now, those schemas I can secure individually. So I can give everybody access to my non-secure data, and I can give only people I trust access to the secure data. So for example, human resources might need to see my social security number to set up payroll or something, but no one else does. And then we can do the same thing with a view. So earlier I was talking about creating data masking inside our view. Here, same thing. So I'm going to create a view that only shows the last four of the social security, but still birth date and salary. We'll create a human resources user, give it select, and we'll actually show that. So yeah, you'll see I can see the view, but I can't see the secure data because I didn't give it permissions, right? So this is pretty basic design stuff, right? Moving forward. All right. And in the slides are updated, obviously. Code's in here. The code is also in a Jupyter Notebook and in a zip file, so if you want to play around with it. Stored procedures are probably better here, right? Because we all have existing databases where that sort of data splitting or views may not be possible, even if we'd like to do that. So let's use stored procedures. Stored procedure, restrict access to using only the stored procedures. Nobody gets added to DB data reader or data writer. Nobody's a sysadmin because we live in an ideal world. Right? Stored procedures only return the data that you need them to return. You can apply some business logic. You can ensure inputs are properly sanitized. This is an effective way of preventing SQL injection, assuming you're sanitizing your inputs. However, your developers may kick and scream. Your developers will kick and scream if you say you can only access through stored procedures. Not to fear, most ORMs have the ability to execute these things. They wouldn't be very good SQL executors if they didn't. So let's take a look at an example here. So, using a stored procedure. Very similar to our view definition. In fact, it's exactly the same. Right down to our join. I'll give my human resources user that I created up above, execute on it, and then we'll take a look at how that looks. All right. How am I getting this? But in any case, you can see that this executed successfully. All right. But really, what have we done? We've essentially kicked our security problem up a level. Now we have to secure all these objects. Who wants to secure 1,000 objects individually? Nobody. OK, good. For this, we can use roles, right? You can logically group permissions either at the database or at the server level. I recommend at the database level whenever possible, right? Secure closest in. Roles are already in the database, so some common ones, DB owner, you know, that thing you give somebody when they're complaining that they can't do function Y. DB data reader, DB data writer, sysadmin, security admin, server admin. Those predefined roles are great in development. Yeah, they're not. Should we be satisfied with these? Absolutely not. These are incredibly broad-based. The idea is that you're going to be able to give someone a bulk set of permissions very quickly and not have to worry about it. That's not how we manage security. But we can define our own rules, right? We can group those permissions logically. So, for example, you could see my human resources user. There's no reason why I can't create a human resources role, and we'll see that in a minute. You can mix permissions to give each role only the permissions that they need, i.e. least privilege. This is a best practice. So my firm does a lot of work for private equity. Yeah, I know. But one of the things we do is we come in and we do security assessments and we go, okay, well, what type of permissions does your development team have? What type of permissions do other people in the organization have? And if the answer is anything other than this, it's not good because somebody could access data that they don't need. Who works in healthcare? Yeah. All right, what's the guideline for HIPAA as far as data access?
Like who should have it and who shouldn't?
Yeah.
Like only the people who directly interact with that patient at that time.
Yeah.
So just like the attending.
Yeah. The minimum amount of data needed to do your job at that moment. So, obviously assign users to roles based on their membership. Your systems administrators have probably already figured out how to do this with Active Directory. And you can map roles to Active Directory groups. Now, when you have to terminate somebody, you're only turning off access in one place, not in a lot of places. All right, how do we do this? We come over. So, as I mentioned, creating a role, human resources users. I'm going to grant some permissions to them. Execute on that stored procedure that I had. Select on some tables, and I'm going to deny select on a specific column. This is a really powerful feature of the permissions model, that I can deny down to a single column. I'm going to go ahead and create a user, add them to the role, and then we'll execute some code and see the results. All right, so stored procedure executed fine. My non-secure data executed fine. But if we come back up here and we look at what I tried to get out of here, select star from securedata.employee. That's this message here. Select permission was denied on the column SSN, right? But I can get everything else out of it. And I'm realizing this isn't a great way to present these demos. Womp womp. All right, any questions so far? Cool. So all this is great. We have a lot of ways to separate out objects. We can give permissions to objects. This is a lot of work that we have to do and we have to take care of on an ongoing basis. There are probably some things built into SQL Server that can help us with this. Yeah.
For this particular scenario, what if this person is just a member of a group? Because then you would have to get them removed from that AD group that has permission.
Yeah, so the question was, if they're members of an AD group and the group had permissions to the role, then we have to remove and add them to the AD group. And so yes, that's true. The idea there is, rather than giving individual user accounts permission in the database, we give a group permission, and then when we have to take some sort of action, like say they retire, right? We need to revoke their access. Now we're just revoking their access in Active Directory. We only have one place to remove that user or remove that group assignment. Whereas if you have them as a user in your database, even though their Active Directory is deactivated, they can't log in anymore. That's still hanging out. You can still give it permissions. It's not a. It's still there. It's not as clean. Does that make sense? Okay. Anything else? All right. Cool. All right. Ah. Yeah, so the question was, if they belong to a group that has access and they get added to a group that doesn't have access, which one wins? I believe it's deny by default, that will win. Right, so it's denies override grants unless you have not specifically been denied permission, in which case the grant wins.
There was actually a different session that I was in that said that there's actually a problem within those groups in that SQL actually won't authenticate you to two different groups. One will always win.
Yeah,
Permissions aren't added.
that's not been my experience. So the observation was that there's an issue with SQL Server in groups where it will only consider your group membership for a single group. So really the answer is test this and not in production. All right. So some built-in features that we have that can help us out. Always encrypted, row-level security. dynamic data masking, transparent data encryption, TDE, and SQL Server Audit. These are not presented in any particular order of usefulness, just in the order that I put them in. All right, Always Encrypted. This is a feature that allows you to encrypt individual columns in a way that the encryption is not reversible by the database engine. It is only reversible by someone who has the key to the column, i.e. the consuming application. Essentially, the consuming application encrypts the data and writes it as a binary data stream into the database, and then it can read it out the same way. Now, Microsoft says this can help protect your data by removing the ability to read it from the database at all, including at rest. But there are some pretty significant drawbacks here. The big one is that not all clients support it. So if you're in the .NET world, you're fine. If you are in Java world, your mileage may vary. Also, data encrypted, there are two ways to encrypt data with Always Encrypted, randomized and deterministic. Randomized, you can't use it for joins, obviously, because if I encrypt happy over and over and over again, I'll get different strings. However, if you use deterministic encryption, well, that's probably not a great idea, right? Because now if I have rather low cardinality on my column, it's going to be easier to reverse engineer that encryption. You're unable to update encrypted columns directly using the database engine. And columns have to use a different collation, any of the bin2 collations. So now you're introducing a second collation into your database, probably. For my recommendation, so there's no demo for this because it is such a pain to set up that I didn't want to go through it and demo it. That would probably be the next, what do we have left, 45 minutes? It would probably take at least that for me to set it all up. And to me, that's not worth it. So just a quick survey in the room. Is anybody actually using this feature? No, OK. I asked in the speaker room earlier, too, and people looked at me like I had grown a second head. All right. It's there. It might have some use, but probably not. OK. Row-level security. Row-level security allows you to use group membership or execution context to only return specific rows based on a table value function. And it's transparent to your consumers, which is great. So why do you want to use it? Well, it's transparent to your consumers. Well, that's not the only reason. This is a great way to centralize security logic, particularly in the context where you have a couple of different consuming applications where it may or may not be easy to manage that security logic in each of them. One of the specific cases that I've run into is where we had an application and Power BI hitting the same data set, and we needed to make sure the security was, the row-level filtering was going to work. This is also a pretty easy way to handle multi-tenant applications. And there is really nice broad compatibility with other SQL Server features with some caveats. There are lots of caveats with these. So there are some drawbacks. They're not that bad. If you're not good at writing table-valued functions, or you write something tremendously complicated, you're going to get a security, or not a security. You're going to get a performance hit, which may or may not rule this out. You can't use partition views. Sorry. And this one's a weird one to me. You cannot create an index on a view on top of a table with a row-level security policy in force. Which I guess kind of makes sense, right? Because the index, yeah. And then this one's a big one. Who uses temporal tables? Cool. I use them. They do not automatically inherit security policies of their parents, and I'll explain what that means in a second. So, how do we implement one of these? All right. So, there's a couple of steps that we have to do in order to implement row-level security. So the first one, and this is really more to keep the database clean than anything else, it's nice to create a schema to manage your security objects. This also allows you to secure that schema in such a way that people can't go in and mess with it if they, don't have sysadmin. So the first step is we create a function. And this function takes usually one parameter. It does have to be an inline table valued function. Multi-statement are not allowed. This function is reusable, which is nice. It's not a one-off. So in this case, I have created one that is named such that it's not reusable or shouldn't be reused. But I'm going to I'm going to expect in my session context a user ID and grab the user ID that was passed in, and I will return 1 where those are equal, which means that where they're not, I'll end up with a null. These table value functions are applied onto the end of your query transparently, so that's how that works. There's a nice note here. You may also want to filter by a login if you have multiple logins or applications. There are a lot of things that you can do here. The only limitation is it does have to be inline. All right, so once we have a function, now we create a security policy for the table. And this security policy is how are we applying this function to our queries. So filter predicate says, when I do a select, I will only get back rows where I get a 1 from my table valued function. And then the block predicate is, I cannot insert rows, in this case, insert rows where this predicate doesn't match. So I can't, if I don't have access to read the row, I'm not going to be able to insert one I can't read either. You can also limit deletes and updates. Similarly, I think the update one triggers the insert. But I would have to go look that up. And then with state equals on, obviously, you can turn it on or off without removing it. So we'll go ahead and create these. Great. And then the way we test this, right? So create my user. In this case, I'm doing it without login because it's a demo. I'm going to grant select, update, delete, insert on my table to that user. This is a best practice. We don't want them to update the column that we're filtering on. The reason for that is you don't want somebody to be able to update the entire table to whatever that filter is, because then they can just see the data. And that would be bad, right? We'll execute this. Is everybody familiar with the session context? Is anyone familiar with the session context? Got a couple. OK. So the session context is essentially metadata that's passed in. It's a set of key value pairs that are set when you start to execute the query, and then inside the query, you can actually access those. So we go back up here, we can see the session context function allows me to get out the value for a specific key. in this case the user ID. This would ideally be set by a consuming application, so things like Entity Framework or ADO.NET have support for this. So I'm going to key user ID value equals 4. I'll get number 4's data. We'll change to 5. We'll get number 5's data, and we'll see that those two sets are different. All right. So right, this is my first set. You see all number 4's and only number 4's. And then my second set is all number 5's and only number 5's. So, incredibly useful. Questions on row-level security before we move forward? All right. Next up, dynamic data masking, right? So earlier on, I said that you can mask data in the definition of a view by essentially creating a mask. Well, wouldn't it be nice if we could do that in the definition of a table? And that's what dynamic data masking offers us. Again, this is a transparent process to users. And the masking function applies to non-privileged users. So, why would you want to use it? Rather than relying on application-level filters or hard-coded strings and views, you get to apply a masking function for your data that then just gets applied to all queries. There's nice broad compatibility with other SQL Server features. And you can specify your own masking function, or there are a couple of default ones which are kind of nice. There's one default one for email. I think there's a default one for phone as well. All right, drawbacks. As you may have guessed, columns encrypted using Always Encrypted cannot also have a mask applied to them. This kind of makes sense, right? Because your column encrypted by Always Encrypted is of type var binary 2 max, or var binary max. You cannot apply a mask to a computed column unless one of its component columns is also masked, which is weird to me. And there's a problem here with data masking, which is if you're clever or not clever, you can figure out the underlying data based on using some where clauses. So for example, if I were to apply a mask on my salary column, where it just displayed 0, I could still, as a non-privileged user, go in and query using very specific betweens and actually figure out what somebody made, even though I don't have the rights to see that data. So, not a panacea, but it can help. All right.
It's not a security feature.
It's not really a security. Well, it's a security feature. We'll put that one in quotes, but I agree. It's a limiting the data that you are allowed to see feature. Jake.
Yeah, it doesn't prevent like a bad actor, but it prevents me, if I'm looking at production data, from seeing things I just don't want to see. Like, I don't want to find out that you were in the hospital. Okay, something like that. So when I'm running my tests, I don't get to see that.
Right.
That's how I do it.
Yeah, it's also, it's particularly effective when you're looking at things like social security numbers, where like you're not going to be able to reverse engineer that with a creative where clause. I mean, maybe you could, but that's going to take a while, and yeah, I mean.
Last time I saw one that made an app that just with phone names, and it just stand and just removed the phone name, artist, and everything.
Yeah, I guess I should probably take a second and go and take a time out and say for any of these security features, minus the ones where we're actually encrypting things, if you're sysadmin or you're really determined to break them, they're not going to protect your data from somebody who already has access to the database, whether it's via an application or Management Studio or something like that. It's just, a lot of this is making it less convenient, or as my friend over there mentioned, for casual users, you're not going to see the data. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, so it was that you can't see the data, but you can test against it to deduce what the values are. That's an accurate way to put that. Sure. Yep. Yeah, a lot of this is predicated on making sure that your database isn't accessed by people, like, yeah. So, I did a couple of different masks here. So, in this case, and we'll see what these do, had a partial function, an email function, and a default function on my phone. We'll input some data. This is my name, email, and phone number at work. If you really want to call me, it'll probably go straight to voicemail. In fact, I don't even know what my voicemail on my work phone sounds like. And then we're just doing some test users, and we'll go ahead and see what this looks like. So this first select is me as a privileged user. What can I see? I'm a sysadmin on my own machine. In fact, because this is Docker on my local on my Mac, I'm logged in as SA because that's good practice, especially for a security talk. So I can see everything. However, when I look as a non-privileged user, you can see my first name is D something. And because of this function up above where I specified you're getting 7 X's, period, it doesn't even, you can't even deduce how long my first name is unless you know. The email function is kind of nice. Side note, the email function will always spit out .com, regardless of what that actually is. And then my phone, you just can't see at all. So, useful. In the back. Let's see. Yeah, so the question in the back was, can you use a case statement or a starts with or something like that and deduce this? So we have some time. So actually what that looks like. Yep. Yep. That I don't think will work because I don't believe that will work. It definitely does work in the where because that's prior to the masking function being applied. That's really where that hole is. But I don't believe it'll work in the select. You've given me something to try out. Yeah. Yes.
From that moment, the data being masked, the old data is not masked from that point. Because I'm still getting the table is large. Try to apply the data.
Yeah, so the question is, can I apply a masking function on a table that already has data in it? And then will that apply from that moment forward? So a couple of things there. One, yes, you absolutely can add a masking function to an existing column, and then that data will start to be returned. The important thing to understand with dynamic data masking is that the data underneath in the table is stored as your plain text. It's not stored masked. So the masking function is really applied when you return the data, not at rest.
Oh, I said they're going to return it just based off the volume.
Right. Yeah, so that's why you can see, like, I got two different returns based on the privilege of the user logged in. Does that make sense? Okay. Other questions here? Yeah. So the question was, how is the dynamic way of doing this different from certificate or symmetric key or something like that? So the difference there is if you use a certificate to encrypt a column, then that data is actually encrypted at rest by that key, and can only, you have to have the key to reverse the encryption. Whereas with this method, you're only masking when it's returned from the engine. At rest, it's stored as its original value. All right. Moving forward. Transparent data encryption, aka the checkbox that you should use even though it may not be as useful as it sounds. So TDE is encrypting the data of the database while it is at rest, right? So this is applying encryption at the disk level that's managed by the database engine. One of the really nice things about this is that encryption applies to your backups as well. So if I have a database that is secured via TDE, my backups are also secured via TDE. Why do you want to use it? Encrypting your data at rest is a good idea. How many people have only cloud-located databases? Nobody. How many people have a data center they can walk into and touch the server where their data is? Okay. Guess what? You can walk into the data center and pull the hard drive out of that server too. So that's why we want to encrypt at rest, right? And then having that encryption apply to the backups as well is really important, because regardless of where you're storing your backup, if it's unencrypted and it gets compromised, then that's free, right? That's easy. You don't want to be the person that finds out that your unencrypted backup is sitting on an unsecured Amazon S3 bucket somewhere. That would be a resume generating event. So there are some drawbacks here. The biggest one being that the server OS probably already has this one covered, particularly if you're on Windows and you have competent sysadmins, because BitLocker is going to be enabled on everything, because it should be. Another drawback here, if you lose your encryption certificate, then well, the database is going to continue functioning fine because SQL Server stores that internally, but you've got a problem if you ever need to restore that backup to another machine. There's some good news. This TDE integrates really well with most major key management providers. including Azure Key Management. So that can be really useful. And then this one may or may not be a problem for you. Instant file initialization is not available when using TDE. It kind of makes sense, right? If you're encrypting the database file, you can't just dynamically grow it whenever you feel like it. There's a pretty good argument there that if you are heavily leveraging instant file initialization, that some planning may be appropriate. Yes? As far as I know, yes. The backups are still normal. They just get encrypted. I don't know if the compression may be less effective or not. Thoughts? Yeah. All right. So how do we enable this? Very easily. This is the shortest and least climatic demo, except some of it's going to fail because I already have a master key on my database. All right. So the first thing is you have to have a master key. Encryption by password. You can also encrypt by certificate, by an external certificate. Don't use this type of password. It's way too easy to crack. You then create a certificate based on the master key. Yep. And then we come in and create a database encryption key. Use the highest algorithm available, in this case AES 256, and then we turn it on. That line is going to fail. All right. So the first two aren't going to work, so we'll just comment them out because they already exist at the server level. And then the rest of this should function fine. And by the way, Management Studio, SQL Server, Azure Data Studio, they all tell you, by the way, this hasn't been backed up. You might want to do that. In fact, they're very, very firm about it. You should immediately back up their certificate and the private key. Why? So if you lose it, your backups are no longer good. All right. Oh yeah, if you have to restart the server, you can't open the database either. Or if you move it, or yeah. All right. Sorry, I couldn't quite hear that. Yeah, if you're using availability groups, you should have the key and the certificate on both servers as well, yes. This is less straightforward to set up with availability groups because there is legwork to do, but it's still definitely possible. All right, last one. No demo on this guy either, just because there's way too much that we could go into here. Yeah. So the question is, can I talk a little bit about different approaches to creating the key hierarchy? Full disclosure, I'm not fully a security guy, so that's a little out of my wheelhouse. If you want to come up and we can talk a little bit about that afterwards, I'd be more than happy to. Yeah. All right. SQL Server Audit. This is a relatively recent feature. This allows you to log events and the details about the events when they happen at either the server or the database level. This could be permission changes, object access, Could even be I ran a select query on the table that I'm not supposed to run select queries on, right? Why do you want to use it? This is a great built-in way to log events. It ensures security policies are followed. There's a lot of traceability on the off chance that you have an external audit who works in an industry where you have lots of audits. Yep, okay. And this can help detect attacks against the server. So high number of failed logins. That's either somebody forgot their password or more likely a malicious attack. So drawbacks. I'm a sysadmin. I can turn this off. That's a problem. The logging methods are not great unless you already have something on your machine, something on your server that allows you to sweep them up. It's either event log or a file. Now, if you're in a large enterprise where you have Dynatrace or whatever else you have, this is probably fine because you can just add that as another log source. But if all you have is the server, that's kind of painful. And then by itself, it doesn't perform any active alerting. So, hey, there's an attack going against my server, and it's logging it. It's not telling anybody. Yeah. Again, this is a solvable problem. You can either solve it yourself or buy some tools that help you solve it. Yeah. Question.
So the sysadmin can turn off. Is there an audit when to turn off? And who turn it off there?
Nope. There is. Well, there can be, but I can turn that one off too. Yeah. So yeah, the ways to get around that, you can set up a policy. You can set up a. Yeah, we're going to talk about permissions here in a second when we talk about retrofitting, because that's the biggest hole in all of this is I'm a sysadmin on my own server. All right, so like I said, there is no demo for this, in part because it would really deserve an entirety of its own talk. There is a link in the back of the deck that points you at the Microsoft documentation. It's actually pretty good. The other reason there's no demo is it requires Management Studio or more T-SQL than I care to write. So, yeah.
There was also a talk on that earlier today. Yeah.
Great. Who went to it? One. Yeah, got a couple. Okay, cool. Yeah. All right, so this is great, but how do I apply it to my existing databases, which we all have? All right, Monday or Tuesday, whenever you are back at work, depending on how far you have to go and how generous your bosses are. All right, number one thing, enable transparent data encryption. Yes, the OS handles this, or system administrator or SAN administrator. And yes, it's just a checkbox in Azure. However, it is worth using for no other reason than your backups are now encrypted. And that, to me, is great. Now, it's one less thing I have to worry about. Particularly if you're backing up to, like, anybody still backing up to tape? Yeah, got a couple. Okay. It's not dead yet.
Of course, if you just enable TDE, your SAN administrator, like, duplication goes.
Yeah, so there's some chatting. We'll get there in a second. Yeah. Okay, taking an inventory of your users and what permissions they have. This one's really important. So I said at the beginning of the talk I used to be a DBA. The first thing I did when I took over this organization as the DBA was who all has sysadmin and on what servers do they have it and why. And I was shocked and appalled. I found a server where, thankfully the CEO didn't have sysadmin, but like C-level people had sysadmin on a server with production data that was HIPAA data. Like, what? It's convenient, I guess. I don't know. But if you're going to go to a role-based system, this is the first step, because you have to figure out what people have. Number one, before you start taking it away, and number two, before you start designing roles that are going to replicate what their access patterns actually should be. Okay? And like I said, this is going to help track down anybody who has more elevated permissions than they should. There's probably another one in here, which is change the SA password if SA is active on your server. Number three, talk to your boss about conducting a security audit. Now, this is one of those things where you can either hire someone, which is fine, or you can do it internally. The option I recommend is the option that is going to be more actionable for your company. I have worked in a lot of organizations where both prior to my consulting life and in my consulting life where if I say it, nobody listens because what do I know? But if you pay a consulting firm $120,000, then they listen. So conduct a security audit. These may already happen in your org, which goes into the next one. But also talk about what to do with the results. So a security audit isn't just a one-time check-the-box kind of thing. You have to take what you found and address it. Application developers have to deal with the same thing, particularly if you have anything web-facing, penetration tests. I've walked into several organizations in the last year. They're like, yeah, we did a penetration test. Let me fast forward. Oh, so what did you do with the results? Oh, nothing. You didn't really fix anything. Talk to your security and compliance people. So one of the things that Tara said yesterday morning, which I love, is email security at your company. See what the response is. See how quick the response is. But also talk to them because they might already have some things in place that you don't know about. To the comment about your SAN administrator will have words with you. But also, they already have ideas about how you can help them. When I was a DBA, the biggest help, or the biggest thing that helped me was talking with our compliance officer and saying, okay, well, what do I actually need to give you to make sure we're covered here? Because that can help prioritize what the work you actually have to do is. And then last, how many are DBAs in here? The whole room. Almost the whole room. How many are developers? Got a couple. How many are both? All right, well, this next one's easy if you're both. Talk to your application developers about how they consume their data. Yes, I know you have to talk to them. Look, ORMs, love them, hate them, whatever, they're probably using one. But when you talk to them and you say, look, we need to get more serious about this, we need to get more structured about this, listen to their answers about what they need to be able to do their jobs, how they need to access the data. Because what good is security if I can no longer do my job? I'm just going to figure out a way around it, right? But also, they might be unaware of some of these features, right? Dynamic data masking. Your applications might have like masking logic spread all around them, right? Now, it's not a perfect security feature, but if I can reduce the lines of code in my application because the database is going to handle that for me consistently every time, am I signing up for that? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. All right. And then the next thing is to start planning the deeper changes. This is a case where I'm glad I'm in the huge room because the slide is not readable. At least not if you're sitting in the back there. So engage with your IT team, start planning some deeper changes. So this is you have the results of figuring out who needs what access. Now we need to plan actually implementing the role-based access. Changing the way we do data access, right? This isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It can't. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of people yelling at you. Changing the way your databases are shaped, how we want to leverage SQL Server Audit, how we want to leverage dynamic data masking, row-level security, if those things are appropriate in our environment. Some of these projects are going to be able to be done transparently, right? So if I swap a view out for a table, that's going to work probably 95% of the time. And remember, you already talked to your application developers to find out where that 5% gap is. Again, don't do this in isolation, right? Talk to your team, talk to the other teams. And then make sure that you're testing your changes in an environment that isn't production. So there's a great joke, and I'm glad I'm going to get to tell it. Everyone has a test environment. Some of us are fortunate to have separate production environments. However, make sure you test these changes. Because if you don't, or if you just do this in production, or do this without talking to anybody, it can be a resume-generating event. And while all of this training and all of this networking, because you guys all networked, right? Listened to Grant on Wednesday and networked. All that's great. We want to be able to leverage that when we want to, not when we have to. Right? All right. Questions? Okay.
Not so much a question, maybe more of a statement, because you mentioned doing a vulnerability assessment or something of those sorts. With the relatively new feature of Management Studio, I think starting in 17.5, they have data classification and vulnerability assessment. It's something to look into. The data classification piece will actually go through the database and recommend data classifications for everything, PII, et cetera. Vulnerability assessment is pretty similarly to what you want a vulnerability assessment to do. So just technologies to look into.
Yeah, so the comment, thank you. The comment there is Management Studio starting in 17.5, we think, has the capability of classifying data and looking for vulnerabilities. It's worth looking into that tool as well. So, thank you. Any other questions?
Talk about groups. We've not really went through this because we don't trust or manage because they can put we have to do that. They never do that. So how do you get around?
So the question was, in the gentleman's firm, they don't use AD groups because they don't trust the domain administrators not to be nefarious about adding people to those groups. And how do you work with that? You don't. Yeah, so I think you're asking what qualifies not necessarily as a technical problem, but as a people problem. However, how do you get around that? I mean, functionally, what you're left with is adding individual users to the database, and that there's more overhead there, but it works. Sorry, gentleman from OCC.
We have separation of duties. Our security folks are actually the ones that add or delete their IDs from Active Directory groups.
Yeah, so the comment there was that they have only security people are allowed to add or remove group members, and that there's a rigorous change process there. Yeah, other question?
Trust but verify. So we have a process once a week that goes out there and checks against the table of known people that are supposed to belong to different groups. And if anything changes, we reach out and say, hey, find out what changed.
Yeah, comment there is trust but verify, so once a week, or it may need to be more frequently depending on your security profile. It goes out and checks to make sure everybody's in the groups that they're supposed to be, or is that accurate? Yeah. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
And you're utilizing deduping for your backups. Is there any situation where that works?
So the question was, if you're utilizing, and I'm probably going to have to throw this back out to the audience because I don't know the answer. If you're utilizing TDE and you're utilizing deduping in your backups, is there a scenario where that works?
Yes.
So I've got a no, but also a yes.
Yes, with some caveats, you're going to have to go to a third-party vendor in order to get that to work. There are some out there that will support you with TDE. However, you are going to find that your restores are going to be significantly slower. You're going to be better off with compressed with TDE over dedupe with TDE.
All right, so the answer there is yes, but you need a vendor, and you're going to buy yourself slower restores. So obviously, RTO is going to be a consideration there. Okay. Other questions? Yeah.
TDE means that TDE will also encrypt.
Yeah, so the question is, does TDE mean that tempDB is also encrypted? Yes. So I think probably the genesis of that question is, will there be a performance hit? It's possible. Obviously, test that in your environment.
It can affect our database.
Yeah, yeah. So TDE is a server level. No, sorry. TDE is a database level, so you can choose. Yeah. Yeah.
So talking about that SQL Server Audit feature, does anything, whether at server level or database level, any negative impact?
So the question is, for SQL Server Audit, are there performance impacts? Is that? As with everything, when you add logging, it's possible. So anytime you're having the database engine do more than just the minimum, when you're adding things on top of that, there can be overhead. My understanding of SQL Server Audit is that it's pretty low impact. That there's not. Yes, thank you. That is what I was looking for. It is built on extended events, so same idea. I have time for one more question. Or people have planes to catch. All right, thank you all very much. And I was right. One other thing I forgot to update in my slides. There's also, hi, I'm speaker name. There's also some additional reading. This deck is available on the Summit site along with the demos. Thank you all very much. I hope you had a great Summit. And I will see you all in Houston next year, I hope.